Rain hammered the streets of Chicago as Ethan Carter checked the clock on his dashboard. 10:47 p.m. Only one delivery remained before his shift was over. For most people, delivering pizza was just another low-paying job. For Ethan, it was survival. At 24 years old, he shared a tiny apartment with two roommates, drove a 15-year-old sedan that barely started in cold weather, and counted every dollar before buying groceries. His college friends had moved on. One worked on Wall Street. Another had become a software engineer in Seattle. Whenever they met, someone always joked, "Oh, still delivering pizzas?" Ethan always smiled. "Yeah." No excuses, no complaints, just another smile before changing the subject. Deep inside, though, every joke hurt more than he admitted. That Friday night had been unusually busy. Families ordered dinner. Office workers stayed late. College students called for midnight snacks. The restaurant manager handed Ethan one final order. "Luxury neighborhood. Big tip if you're lucky." Ethan grabbed the insulated bag and headed toward the address. Outside, the rain grew heavier. Visibility became terrible. His windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The GPS estimated 12 minutes. Halfway there, traffic suddenly slowed. Most drivers switched lanes and continued. But something caught Ethan's eye. A black luxury SUV had crashed through a guardrail and landed in a ditch. Its headlights flickered. Steam rose from beneath the hood. No police, no ambulance, nobody had stopped. Ethan looked at the delivery receipt. He looked back at the wreck. For 1 second he hesitated. If he stopped, the pizza would be cold. He'd probably lose the customer, maybe even the tip. Then another thought crossed his mind. What if someone's still inside? Without thinking again, he pulled over. Rain soaked his clothes within seconds. Mud covered his shoes as he climbed down toward the vehicle. The driver's side door wouldn't open. The windshield was cracked. Inside sat an older man, unconscious. Blood ran down the side of his forehead. Ethan shouted, "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. Smoke slowly drifted from under the hood. His heart started racing. He grabbed a rock lying nearby and slammed it into the side window. Once, twice, 3 times. The glass finally shattered. Ignoring the cuts on his hands, Ethan reached inside, unlocked the door, and pulled with everything he had. The man barely moved. He was much heavier than Ethan expected. Smoke became thicker. People had finally started gathering, but nobody came closer. Several stood on the roadside, recording everything with their phones. "Call 911!" Ethan yelled. One woman nodded while dialing. Another man simply watched. Ethan wrapped both arms around the stranger and pulled again. Slowly, inch by inch, they finally collapsed onto the wet grass. Less than 20 seconds later, a loud explosion shook the night. Flames burst from the front of the SUV. The crowd gasped. Someone whispered, "He saved him!" Sirens filled the air minutes later. Paramedics rushed toward the injured man. One of them examined Ethan's bleeding hands. "You okay?" "I'll be fine." "What happened?" "I just couldn't leave him." The ambulance doors closed. Both vehicles disappeared into the storm. Only then did Ethan remember. The pizza, still sitting inside his car, cold, completely ruined. Back at the restaurant, the manager wasn't happy. "You abandoned the delivery?" "There was a crash. You should have called us." "I know." The customer demanded a refund. Ethan simply nodded. The manager sighed. "I'm taking the cost out of tonight's tips." Ethan didn't argue. He quietly emptied his pockets. $37. That was all he'd earned after nearly 10 hours of work. The next morning, life continued as usual. Nobody at the restaurant mentioned the accident. Customers came and went. Phones kept ringing. Ovens stayed busy. For Ethan, it was just another Saturday, until around noon. Every television inside the restaurant suddenly switched to breaking news. Employees stopped working. Customers stared at the screens. The news anchor spoke quickly. Authorities have confirmed that last night's crash victim was billionaire entrepreneur Richard Hawthorne, founder and CEO of Hawthorne Global Industries. Everyone inside the restaurant froze. Photos appeared on the screen. Private jets, business awards, magazine covers. One estimated net worth, $11.4 billion, the reporter continued. Doctors say Mr. Hawthorne survived thanks to the actions of an unidentified pizza delivery driver who pulled him from the burning vehicle moments before it exploded. The restaurant became silent. Every employee slowly turned and looked at Ethan. For a few seconds, nobody said a word. The restaurant manager stared at Ethan in disbelief. "Wait, that was you?" Ethan shrugged. "I guess. You never told us." "I didn't think it mattered." Before anyone could ask another question, the front door opened. Two men in dark suits walked inside. The entire restaurant fell silent. "Is Ethan Carter here?" Ethan slowly raised his hand. "I'm Ethan." One of the men smiled politely. "Mr. Hawthorne would like to meet you." 3 days later, Ethan stood in one of the tallest office buildings in Chicago. Everything felt unreal. Marble floors, glass walls, employees in expensive suits. He had never imagined himself in a place like this. An assistant opened a large wooden door. "Mr. Hawthorne will see you now." Richard Hawthorne stood by the window overlooking the city. A bandage was still wrapped around his forehead. When he saw Ethan, he smiled. "I owe you my life." Ethan shook his head. "I only did what anyone should do." Richard laughed softly. "No, most people drove past." He walked to his desk and placed a large envelope in front of Ethan. Inside was a check, $1 million. Ethan stared at it without speaking. "Take it," Richard said. "You've earned it." For several seconds, the room was completely silent. Then Ethan carefully closed the envelope. "I'm sorry," Richard frowned. "What do you mean?" "I can't accept it." Even the assistant standing near the door looked shocked. Richard leaned forward. "Most people dream about receiving a check like that." "I know. So why refuse?" Ethan looked him in the eyes. "Because if I take money for saving someone, it changes the reason I stopped that night." Richard didn't answer. Ethan continued. "If I'd known who you were, I still would have stopped. If you had been broke, I still would have stopped. That's enough for me." Richard slowly smiled. Then he did something nobody expected. He tore the check in half. "You've just passed a test you didn't know you were taking." Ethan looked confused. Richard laughed. "I wasn't trying to repay you. I wanted to learn what kind of man you were." He reached into a drawer and pulled out another folder. "This isn't money. It's an opportunity." Inside was an offer for a fully paid internship at Hawthorne Global Industries. Salary, training, housing assistance, a personal mentor. Richard extended his hand. "I can't promise it'll be easy, but I can promise you'll get a fair chance." After a long pause, Ethan shook his hand. The first months were brutal. He knew nothing about corporate business. He struggled with spreadsheets. He made mistakes during meetings. Some employees whispered behind his back, "He's just a pizza guy. He doesn't belong here." Every criticism motivated him even more. He arrived before sunrise, stayed after everyone left, read business books every night, asked questions, listened carefully, refused to quit. Richard watched everything without interfering. He never gave Ethan special treatment. "If you want respect," he once told him, "earn it." And Ethan did. 5 years passed. The former delivery driver had become one of the company's most trusted project managers. When shipping costs began destroying company profits, Ethan proposed a completely new logistics system. Many executives laughed. "It'll never work." Richard approved the idea anyway. 6 months later, the project saved the company more than $300 million. The same executives who had doubted him were now asking for his advice. At the company's annual conference, thousands of employees filled the auditorium. Richard Hawthorne, now older and preparing to retire, walked onto the stage. He smiled as Ethan sat in the front row. "I've invested in hundreds of companies," Richard began. "I've built factories on 3 continents. I've signed deals worth billions." He paused. "But the greatest investment I ever made wasn't in technology. It was believing in a pizza delivery driver who refused my money." The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation echoed through the hall. Richard called Ethan onto the stage. In front of everyone here, I'd like to introduce the next CEO of Hawthorne Logistics. The applause grew even louder. A year later, Ethan drove through the same neighborhood where everything had begun. He stopped outside the small pizza restaurant where he had once worked late nights. The place looked exactly the same. The smell of fresh pizza filled the air. Young delivery drivers rushed in and out, carrying insulated bags. One of them looked exhausted, probably about Ethan's age when his own story began. Ethan ordered a simple pepperoni pizza. When the bill arrived, he quietly left a $10,000 tip. The cashier stared in disbelief. "There must be a mistake, sir." Ethan smiled. "No. It's for everyone who's still working hard, even when nobody notices." As he walked toward the door, the young delivery driver asked, "Do you have any advice?" Ethan turned around with the same quiet smile he had worn years before. "Never let your current job convince you that it has to be your future." Then he stepped outside. The rain had finally stopped, and for the first time in years, the road ahead was completely clear.